The dog's name was Bruno, and he was bleeding out on the floor of Mercy General's main corridor when Nurse Lena Voss dropped to her knees beside him without a second thought. She hadn't been asked to. Nobody had called her over. She was coming off a 12-hour shift, badge still clipped to her scrub pocket, sneakers squeaking on the polished floor, and all she saw was a German shepherd in a tactical vest, one rear leg soaked red, and a young Army Ranger crouched beside him with shaking hands and nowhere to put them. "I don't know what to do," the soldier said. His name tape read Corbin. He looked maybe 22. He jumped in front of. There was a guy with a knife outside the ER entrance, and Bruno just, "I don't know what to do." Lena was already pressing her cardigan against the wound. "Talk to me," she said. "How long ago?" "Maybe 8 minutes. I drove straight here." "You did the right thing. Keep your hands here. Right here. Pressure steady." She didn't stop to think about whether this was her job. She didn't think about the policy hanging in laminated frames down the hall, the one that said Mercy General was not a veterinary facility, and staff were not authorized to treat non-human patients. She thought about the femoral artery and how fast a body could empty, and Bruno had one of those, same as anyone else. She thought about Corbin's hands, and how much they looked like her brother's hands when he came back from Kandahar. She got Bruno stabilized in one of the supply corridors off the main hall, not in a patient room. She wasn't stupid. Using saline flush and wound packing from a trauma cart and 2 techs who saw what she was doing and said nothing except, "What do you need?" She talked to Corbin the whole time. She told him Bruno was going to be okay. She didn't know that yet, but she said it anyway, because that's what you do when someone's hands won't stop shaking. The vet clinic attached to the base was 40 minutes away. The emergency animal hospital across town had told Corbin over the phone that a dog, even a working dog, even a military working dog with active deployment status, would have to wait for intake processing. 40 minutes processing. Bruno didn't have 40 minutes. He did now. When the duty supervisor, a woman named Sandra Holt, found Lena finishing the wound closure at approximately 11:15 that night, she stood in the doorway of the supply corridor for a long moment without saying anything. Lena heard her there. She kept her eyes on Bruno. "Voss," Sandra said. "Almost done. You need to stop what you're doing. He'll bleed out if I stop. This is not a veterinary facility. I know what it is." Lena tied off the last suture. Her hands were completely steady. "I know exactly what it is." Sandra Holt had been a supervisor at Mercy General for 11 years. She was not a cruel woman, not exactly, but she was a precise one, and she had built her career on the principle that rules exist for reasons and that the reasons are what keep people alive. She genuinely believed this. Lena had always understood that about her, even when it made Sandra difficult to work with. Even when Sandra had written her up twice in 3 years for what the incident reports called unilateral patient advocacy decisions. But understanding something doesn't make it any less cold when it's pointed at you. "You've treated a non-human patient using hospital resources without authorization," Sandra said. "That's a liability issue. That's a policy violation. That's grounds for immediate suspension pending review." Corbin stood up from where he'd been crouching beside Bruno. He was tall when he stood up. He had a combat infantryman badge on his chest and dirt still on his boots from whatever he'd been doing before this. "Ma'am," he said, "she saved my dog's life. Sir, I understand that, and I'm glad your animal received care. But this is a matter of hospital policy, and it doesn't. He's not my animal." Corbin's voice was quiet. "He's my partner. He's been my partner for 2 years. He took a knife for me tonight." Sandra looked at Corbin for a moment. Then she looked at Bruno, who was lying still now, breathing slow and even, the wound clean and packed and closed. Then she looked at Lena. "My office," she said. "Now." The meeting lasted 22 minutes. Lena knew because she watched the clock on Sandra's office wall the whole time. It was one of those institutional clocks, white face, black numbers, the kind that moves in little jerks rather than a smooth sweep, and she counted every jerk while Sandra laid out what was going to happen next. Suspension without pay, pending a full HR review. The review would consider whether her nursing license should be reported to the state board. She would need to surrender her badge before leaving the building. Security would escort her out. "Tonight?" Lena asked. "Tonight. My locker, you can arrange to collect your personal belongings during business hours with an HR representative present." Lena thought about her locker. Her good winter coat was in there. Her car keys were in her bag, which she'd left at the nurse's station. Her phone was in her scrub pocket, at least. She went through the practical inventory in her head the way she always went through supply carts, methodically, without panic, because panic doesn't help anyone. "I want to be clear," she said. "You're suspending me for providing emergency care to a living creature who would have died without it. I'm suspending you for violating established protocol in a way that exposes this hospital to significant legal risk. The dog is a decorated military working dog with an active service record. That doesn't change the policy." Lena looked at her for a long moment. "No," she said. "I suppose it doesn't." She got her bag from the nurse's station herself before security arrived, which took them long enough that she had time to say goodbye to the two techs who'd helped her and to check on Bruno one more time. He was awake. His eyes tracked her when she came into the corridor. She put her hand flat on his head, between his ears, and he leaned into it with what little strength he had. Corbin was sitting on the floor beside him. "They're making you leave?" he said. "Yeah, because of Bruno, because of policy." She straightened up. "Make sure someone checks that dressing in 6 hours. And he needs fluids. They should be starting an IV line. I'll make sure." Corbin stood. He was looking at her with an expression she recognized from the ER, the particular look of someone who has just watched something happen that they cannot explain and cannot undo. "I'm going to fix this." "It's not your problem to fix." "He's my partner," Corbin said again. "That makes it my problem." The security guard was a man named Lou. She knew him, had known him for 3 years, had brought him coffee on night shifts, and knew his daughter was in 3rd grade, and his wife had been sick last winter. And he walked her to the main exit without speaking. At the door, he said, "I'm sorry, Lena," so quietly she almost didn't hear it. "I know," she said. "You're just doing your job." The parking lot was cold. It was November, the kind of November that doesn't apologize for itself, and she'd left her coat in her locker. And she stood by her car for a moment with her keys in her hand and her breath making clouds in the lamplight and thought, very deliberately, about what to do next. She had 2 weeks of savings. She had a brother in Seattle and a mother in Phoenix and a nursing license she'd earned by working full-time while going to school at night. She had 3 years of good performance reviews and 2 incident reports and the memory of Bruno's eyes tracking her across the room. She got in her car. She drove home. She did not cry, not because she didn't feel like crying, but because she'd learned a long time ago that there were things worth spending tears on and things that weren't, and she was reserving judgment on this one. She called her brother from the parking lot of her apartment complex. "They fired me," she said. "For what? For doing my job." A pause. "Sort of. For doing more than my job." She heard him sit up. He was 3 hours behind her. She'd probably woken him up, but he had the particular alertness of someone who learned to come fully awake in seconds and never quite lost it. "Tell me," he said, she told him. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The dog okay?" he said. "I think so. He was stable when I left." "Good," her brother said. "Good." Another pause. "You know you did the right thing." "Yeah, they're going to figure that out. Maybe." "Lena." His voice was careful. "There's a process for this. The Army doesn't let things like this go without. There are people whose entire job is to—" "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you to fix it. I know you're not. I'm just saying." She went inside. She ate cereals, standing over her kitchen sink, because that was the kind of night it was. She set her alarm for 6:30 out of habit, then remembered and turned it off, then lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about all the times in her career she had bent toward the right thing, even when the right thing was inconvenient, and whether any of it added up to anything, and whether that was even the right question. She fell asleep eventually. She always did. The next morning, Mercy General's HR office opened at 8. At 7:53, Lena was parked in the lot, her good coat in the passenger seat. She'd called ahead, asked if someone could retrieve it from her locker, and a woman named Rosa, who worked the front desk, had left it at reception for her without being asked twice. And she was drinking coffee from a gas station cup and watching the building like she still worked there. She didn't know what she was waiting for. She went home. She spent 2 days calling her union rep, who was helpful and sympathetic, and explained that the review process typically took 4 to 6 weeks, and that in the meantime, she should document everything she could remember about the incident in as much detail as possible, and that whistleblower protections might apply depending on how the hospital chose to frame the suspension. On the third day, she got a call from a number she didn't recognize. "Is this Lena Voss?" "Yes. This is Major Dana Rhodes, U.S. Army. I'm the veterinary officer assigned to K-9 unit out of Fort Halstead. I understand you're the nurse who treated Sergeant Bruno on the night of November 14th. Lena sat up straighter in her chair. "Yes. How are you doing, Ms. Voss?" It was such an unexpected question that she almost laughed. "I've had better weeks. I imagined so." Major Rhodes's voice was direct and unhurried. "I've been briefed on what happened at Mercy General. I've also spoken with Specialist Corbin at some length. I want to be clear about a few things. First, Bruno is recovering well. The wound care you provided was exactly right. The vet who reviewed your work said your suture technique was cleaner than some of what he sees in clinical settings. You probably saved his life." "I know," Lena said. Then, because that sounded wrong. I know what his condition was when I started. I knew what it would have been if I hadn't." "I know what you mean." A pause. "The Army takes the welfare of its working dogs very seriously, Ms. Voss. Bruno has an active deployment record. He has a service number. Legally speaking, he's more analogous to a piece of specialized military equipment than he is to a civilian's pet. But practically speaking, he's a member of his unit, and his unit takes that seriously. Specialist Corbin takes it very seriously. He made that clear. He's been making it clear to quite a few people over the last 72 hours, Major Rhodes said, and Lena could hear something in her voice that might have been admiration. "I'm calling to tell you that the Army is aware of your situation. I'm also calling to ask if you'd be willing to provide a formal written account of the events of November 14th for inclusion in an official inquiry." Lena looked at her kitchen ceiling. "What kind of inquiry?" she said. "The kind that tends to have consequences," Major Rhodes said. She wrote the account over the course of one evening, 6 pages, single-spaced, every detail she could remember in chronological order. The timeline, the supplies she'd used, the nature of the injury and why it required immediate intervention. The conversation with Sandra Holt, the specific words Sandra had used, the walk to the exit, Lou's apology at the door. She included the part about her coat. She didn't know why, exactly. It wasn't the most important detail. But it seemed important to her that whoever read this account understood what the night had actually felt like. Not just the medical facts, not just the policy violation, but the specific texture of standing in a cold parking lot in November with no coat on because you'd just been escorted out of the building where you'd worked for 3 years for doing something that felt, in your body and your gut and every trained instinct you had, completely and obviously right. She sent it to Major Rhodes at 9:15. At 9:22, she got a reply, "Thank you, we'll be in touch." She went to bed. The call came on a Tuesday, 10 days after the suspension. Not to her, to Mercy General's administrative offices. She found out about it afterward, pieced together from what Rosa told her off the record and what she could verify through her union rep and what Corbin eventually told her directly, standing in a parking lot outside the base vet clinic, where Bruno was finishing his recovery. What she understood was this. At approximately 9 in the morning, a convoy of 3 vehicles arrived at Mercy General. Not storming, not quite, nothing so dramatic. This was real life, not a movie, but deliberate. Present, the kind of arrival that is designed to be noticed. 2 of the vehicles were Army issue. The third was unmarked, but had government plates. 7 people walked into the hospital's main administrative entrance. Among them, Major Rhodes, a JAG officer, a representative from the Department of the Army's Office of the Inspector General, and Specialist Corbin, who had apparently asked to be present and been told yes. They asked to meet with hospital leadership. Hospital leadership, to its credit, did not make them wait. The meeting lasted slightly under 2 hours. Lena did not know exactly what was said in that meeting, and likely never would. What she knew was the outcome. Sandra Holt was placed on administrative leave pending a separate internal review. The suspension of Lena Voss was rescinded effective immediately. The hospital's legal team issued a statement characterizing the November 14th incident as having been handled without adequate consideration of the circumstances, which was the legal equivalent of saying they'd gotten it wrong without actually saying they'd gotten it wrong. Her union rep called her at noon. "They're offering reinstatement," he said, "full back pay for the suspension period, And they want to schedule a meeting to discuss, and I'm quoting here, updating protocols related to emergency care situations involving military working animals. Lena was quiet for a moment. That's it? There may be more. The Army inquiry is still open, but in terms of your employment, yeah, that's the immediate offer. She thought about Sandra. She didn't feel triumphant. She'd worked alongside Sandra Holt for 3 years. She knew Sandra genuinely believed the rules were there to protect people. She just also knew that rules followed without judgment are a wall, not a door, and that sometimes the most important thing a person can do is understand the difference. I'll take the meeting, she said, and the reinstatement. Tell them yes. Done. When do you want to go back? She thought about Bruno, about Corbin's shaking hands in the corridor, about her coat hanging in a locker while she stood in November air. Monday, she said. I'll come back Monday. She went to the base vet clinic on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after the incident. Bruno was in a large kennel run near the back, the kind with an outdoor access panel, and when the vet tech brought Lena back to see him, he lifted his head before she reached the run. His ears came forward. His tail moved once, twice, in that economical way working dogs have, not exuberant, but certain. He knew her. Corbin was there too, sitting in a folding chair next to the run with a cup of coffee going cold on the floor beside him. He stood up when she came in. He's been doing good, he said. They say another 2 weeks, and he can start light activity. That's faster than I expected. He's motivated. Corbin looked at Bruno with the particular expression she'd seen before, the one that didn't quite fit any category, something between professional assessment and something much older. He doesn't like being in here. He'd rather be working. He'll get there, yeah. He looked back at her. How are you doing? Going back Monday, she said. Good. He said it simply, no ceremony to it. Good. She crouched down in front of Bruno's kennel. He pushed his nose against the chain link, and she put her fingers there for him to smell. And then he put his big square head against the link, and she scratched behind his ears, and he closed his eyes. There was a moment, just a moment, when the clinic was quiet enough that she could hear him breathing, slow and even and solid. He's going to need a follow-up evaluation of the wound site around week 6, she said. The scarring along the lateral aspect. Doc Marino already flagged it. Good. Make sure they document the range of motion assessment too, Lena. Corbin was almost smiling. We got it. I know. She stood. I like to know things are covered. Yeah, he said. I noticed that about you. She drove home with the window cracked because the afternoon had gone mild, the way November sometimes surprises you when you're not expecting it to. She had a shift on Monday, a full 12 hours, and she had notes to review and paperwork to file, and a follow-up call with her union rep and her brother to call back and a grocery list she'd been ignoring for 10 days. She stopped at the grocery store on the way home. She bought things in categories, the way she always did, moving through the aisles efficiently, because efficiency was not a habit she'd ever been able to turn off. And at the checkout, she stood behind a woman with a little girl who was maybe 4 years old, the girl holding her mother's hand and staring at the candy display with the pure focused intensity of someone encountering an unsolvable dilemma. Lena watched her and thought about Bruno's eyes tracking her across the corridor, and Corbin's hands and the clock on Sandra's wall moving in its little jerks. She thought about what her brother had said. They're going to figure that out. Sometimes they do, she thought. Sometimes the weight of a thing shifts and the right side comes up, and the rules bend toward the person who was right instead of the institution that was wrong. It doesn't always happen. It didn't always happen to her, but sometimes it did, and the times it did were worth carrying. The little girl chose a pack of gum. She held it up for her mother to see, triumphant. Lena paid for her groceries and went home.